The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. From the top floor of the glass tower, it looked like the entire city was weeping, streaks of water tracing the window like veins of sorrow. Amelia Vaughn stood there in her tailored navy suit, a woman carved out of elegance and control. She was 38, the youngest billionaire CEO in New York, and the world called her a genius. But lately the title felt hollow. Every morning she woke up, saw her reflection in the mirror, and wondered if brilliance was just another word for loneliness. Down below, the streets shimmered with headlights. The lobby was being cleaned, as always, by the night staff. Amelia barely noticed them, ghosts of her empire, invisible and constant. But tonight, as she turned from the window, something caught her attention. Through the glass pane of her office, she saw an older black man pushing a mop across the marble floor of the top executive hall, a floor that very few janitors ever touched. "Who's that?" she asked without looking away. Her assistant, a thin man named Victor, glanced up from his tablet. "New hire, I think." "Night maintenance. Name's Elijah Carter, here?" "On this floor." He said the regular janitor called in sick. Offered to cover the shift, Amelia frowned slightly, then shrugged. "Well, as long as he doesn't scratch the marble," she turned back to her desk, buried again in the sea of digital numbers. But as the night stretched on, she found her eyes drifting back to the window. Elijah moved with a slow, deliberate grace. Every motion seemed careful, like he took pride in work most people overlooked. When he finished one section, he'd step back and admire it, as if he were polishing not a floor, but a memory. Around midnight, Amelia was still in her office, the blue glow of the computer painting her face pale. The markets had shifted again. Her company, Vaughn Global Holdings, had lost millions overnight. Every instinct told her to make cuts, lay off staff, sell divisions. But something deep in her gut whispered that she was missing the bigger picture. The elevator dinged softly behind her. She turned to see Elijah entering with his cart. "Oh, I didn't realize anyone was still up here," he said, voice deep and warm. "I could say the same," she replied, closing her laptop. "You're working late." He smiled. "Someone's got to make it shine before the sun comes up." There was something about his tone, humble but not submissive, confident even. Amelia leaned back in her chair. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe curiosity, but she felt an odd impulse. "Tell me something, Elijah," she said suddenly. "You ever think about money?" He chuckled softly. "Ma'am, I think about money every time I buy groceries." "No, I mean investments, strategy. What would you do if you were me? If you ran a billion-dollar company?" He paused, mop still in hand, then looked at her. "Why? You want my advice?" The question caught her off guard. She smirked. "Maybe I do." "Humor me." Elijah set the mop aside, wiped his hands on his uniform, and thought for a long moment. "All right," he said finally. "You really want to know what I'd do?" "Please, enlighten me." "I'd stop chasing more," he said simply. She blinked. "Excuse me?" "I'd stop chasing more," he repeated. "More money, more power, more everything. 'Cause the more you chase, the emptier it feels when you get it." She frowned slightly, caught between offense and fascination. "You think I'm empty?" He looked her dead in the eye, calm and unflinching. "I think you're tired." For a second, the air in the room seemed to still. Amelia had faced boardrooms full of sharks, investors who worshipped her one minute and threatened her the next. But no one had ever said that to her. Elijah continued, his tone softening. "I used to run a little shop once back home in Georgia. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Then the recession hit. Lost everything. I spent years angry at the world. Thought if I could just get back what I lost, I'd be happy again. But life don't work like that. Took me a long time to learn peace don't come from getting more. It comes from giving more." Amelia leaned forward, elbows on her desk. That's poetic, she said carefully. But in business, that's not how the world works. He smiled faintly. Maybe that's the problem. They sat in silence for a moment, a billionaire and a janitor, separated by status, but somehow equal in that quiet room. You really think giving more could make someone like me happier? She asked finally. I don't think, he said. I know. The richest folks I've met weren't the ones with the most. They were the ones who helped others rise with them. Amelia exhaled slowly, unsure how to respond. She'd spent her entire career clawing her way to the top, believing success meant standing above everyone else. But something about Elijah's words gnawed at her, not because they were naive, but because they felt true. Thank you, Elijah, she said at last, her voice quieter. You've given me something to think about. He nodded politely and went back to work, humming softly as he mopped. She watched him go, wondering why his words lingered longer than all the board meetings and market forecasts combined. That night, Amelia couldn't sleep. She lay in her penthouse, surrounded by glass and steel, but her mind replayed Elijah's calm voice again and again. The more you chase, the emptier it feels. The next morning, she arrived at the office earlier than usual. The rain had stopped and the city was washed clean. Her assistant entered with a stack of reports. Victor, she said suddenly, find out everything you can about the night janitor, Elijah Carter. Victor blinked. The janitor? Why? Just do it. By noon, a file sat on her desk. She opened it slowly. Elijah Carter, age 62, former small business owner, lost his company after the financial crash of 2008. Divorced, 2 kids, no criminal record, worked maintenance jobs ever since. Amelia stared at the photo paper clipped to the top, Elijah smiling, his eyes full of quiet strength. She closed the file and sat back. For some reason, she felt a pull she couldn't quite name. Curiosity, admiration, maybe guilt. That evening, when Elijah returned for his shift, she was waiting. Mr. Carter, she greeted, standing by the elevator. He looked surprised. Ma'am, didn't expect to see you still here. I was hoping we could talk again. Maybe over coffee? He chuckled. You sure you want to be seen having coffee with a janitor? She smiled. If anyone asks, I'll tell them I'm learning how to clean up my act. He laughed, a deep, warm sound that filled the empty hallway. All right, Miss Vaughn. Coffee it is. They walked together down the street to a small cafe, the kind of place Amelia hadn't been to in years. The air smelled of roasted beans and rain-damp pavement. They talked for hours about life, about loss, about how money changes people. She told him about her parents, about how her father's obsession with wealth had destroyed their family. He told her about rebuilding his life one humble job at a time. By the time they left, the city had grown quiet again. For the first time in years, Amelia felt something she hadn't felt since she was young. Peace. As they said goodbye, Elijah looked at her with that same calm wisdom. Ma'am, he said softly, you got a good heart under all that armor. Don't let the world make you forget it. She nodded, her throat tight. Thank you, Elijah. Truly. When she got back to her penthouse, she didn't open her laptop. She just stood by the window, watching the city lights blur against the night sky, and wondered how a man with nothing could somehow possess everything she'd been searching for. And somewhere in the quiet hum of the city below, she realized this wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning. The following week, Amelia Vaughn sat at the head of her boardroom table, the morning sun flooding through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The room buzzed with tension. A dozen executives in tailored suits flipped through quarterly reports filled with red ink and numbers that screamed decline. Vaughn Global Holdings, once untouchable, was bleeding. Her CFO cleared his throat. We're facing a 30% revenue loss across the European division. If we don't cut costs immediately, investors will panic. Then cut them, said one director. Fire a few hundred staff, restructure, show strength. Amelia listened, her pen unmoving, her eyes distant. For years, that kind of decision had come easily. Logical, emotionless, efficient. But Elijah's voice echoed in her mind like a stubborn melody. The more you chase, the emptier it feels. The richest folks are the ones who help others rise with them. She looked around the room, men and women who'd followed her ruthlessly pragmatic playbook for years, and realized she no longer believed in it. "No layoffs," she said quietly. The room fell silent. Her CFO blinked. "Excuse me?" I said, "No layoffs," Amelia repeated, voice stronger. "We find another way." "With all due respect," another executive snapped, "we don't have time for sentimentality." "The market doesn't reward kindness." Amelia leaned forward, her tone sharp but calm. "Then maybe it's time the market learns." Whispers rippled across the table, but she didn't flinch. Something inside her had shifted. She wasn't sure if it was courage or madness, but she knew one thing. She couldn't go back to being the woman who saw people as numbers. When the meeting ended, she stayed behind, staring at the city. The glass towers glittered like knives. For the first time, they looked fragile. That night, as she left her office, she saw Elijah again, mopping the corridor with that same patient rhythm. "Elijah," she called softly. He turned, smiling. "Evening, Miss Vaughn." "You look like you've been wrestling angels," she chuckled. "Board meeting." "I might have just made the most unpopular decision of my career. Then it's probably the right one," he said with a grin. She hesitated. "You ever feel like the world only respects you when you play by its rules?" "All the time," Elijah said. "But I learned something years ago. When you bend too long to fit someone else's shape, you forget the shape God gave you." Her eyes softened. "You talk like a philosopher." He laughed. "No, ma'am. Just a janitor who's cleaned up enough messes to know which stains are worth scrubbing." She smiled, shaking her head. "You're wasted on floors." He tilted his head. "Maybe. But sometimes being close to the ground keeps you closer to the truth." His words struck her again, simple yet profound. She'd spent years surrounded by people who talked like strategists, yet none of them could make her think the way Elijah did. Over the next few weeks, something remarkable began to happen. Amelia started inviting Elijah for short talks after hours, sometimes over coffee, sometimes during his shift breaks. She'd ask him about people, about fairness, about how to rebuild something that had lost its soul. He never told her what to do. He just told stories about his father who worked 3 jobs but never complained, about the bakery owner who forgave him a debt, about learning that dignity didn't come from wealth but from purpose. And somehow those stories found their way into her decisions. She created a new internal program called the Foundation Project, redirecting a portion of company profits to support low-income entrepreneurs. She cut executive bonuses and raised wages for the lowest-paid staff. Her PR team thought she'd lost her mind, until the media picked up the story. "Billionaire CEO revamps empire to uplift workers," read one headline. "From greed to growth, Vaughn Global's new model." The company's image, once sterile and cold, began to glow with something unexpected: humanity. But not everyone was pleased. One night, as Amelia worked late, Victor entered her office, pale and nervous. "Ma'am, there's a problem. The investors, they're furious. They think your new initiatives are too risky." She sighed. "Let them be. It's time they learned money isn't the only measure of success." "Ma'am," Victor pressed, "they're threatening to call an emergency vote to remove you as CEO." She froze. The room went quiet, except for the ticking of her watch. It was the one thing she'd feared, losing everything she'd built. For a moment, her confidence cracked. She stared at the city lights, wondering if she'd gone too far. Then she thought of Elijah, his calm eyes, his steady hands, his voice telling her, peace don't come from getting more. It comes from giving more. Schedule the meeting, she said finally. I'll face them. The day of the investor meeting, the boardroom was electric with tension. Cameras clicked, pens scratched, and whispers filled the air. Amelia stood at the front, poised and calm. One shareholder, a silver-haired man with a gold watch, leaned forward. Miss Vaughn, profits have dipped. Your philanthropy is admirable, but this is business. We can't afford your morality crusade. Amelia smiled faintly. If morality and business can't coexist, then one of them is broken, and it's not morality. A murmur swept through the room. She went on, her voice growing stronger. We've spent years chasing numbers, cutting corners, treating people like statistics. And where has it gotten us? Burnout, distrust, fear. I refuse to run a company that profits from pain. Then you'll lose everything, another investor warned. Maybe, she said softly. But I'd rather lose money than lose myself. Silence fell. For a moment, no one knew how to respond. Then an older woman near the back spoke up. I've watched this company for years, she said, and I believe Miss Vaughn is right. Compassion builds loyalty. Loyalty builds legacy. Gradually, heads began to nod. Not all, but enough. When the vote came, Amelia survived by a single margin. That night, she returned to the office exhausted but smiling. Elijah was there again, buffing the marble floor until it gleamed. How'd it go? He asked. They almost fired me, she said, laughing weakly. But they didn't. He grinned. Then maybe you're finally doing something worth losing for. Amelia looked at him, emotion rising unexpectedly. Elijah, why do you keep helping me? You owe me nothing. He leaned on his mop and smiled gently. Because someone once helped me when I didn't deserve it. And I made a promise. I'd pay that grace forward wherever I could. She blinked back tears. You're something else. Nah, he said. Just trying to live clean in a dirty world. Over the next months, Vaughn Global transformed. Employee morale soared, turnover dropped, and customers began flocking to the company because they trusted it again. What began as a gamble became a quiet revolution. But behind the scenes, something else was happening, something neither of them spoke of aloud. Amelia began to feel something deeper for Elijah, something she didn't know how to name. It wasn't romance exactly. It was admiration, reverence, gratitude. He had become her compass, and Elijah, though humble, could feel it too. He'd seen many kinds of power in his life, but none so beautiful as the kind that chose compassion over control. One evening, as they stood by the lobby windows, Amelia asked softly, Do you ever regret what you lost, Elijah? The business, the house, everything? He smiled, eyes distant. Sometimes. But then I think, if I hadn't lost all that, I wouldn't be here. Wouldn't have met you. She swallowed hard. You think things happen for a reason? He nodded. Always. Even pain's a teacher, if you let it speak. Outside, the city glowed gold against the dark, and for a moment silence wrapped around them. Not awkward, but sacred. Two souls from opposite worlds, connected by the same truth. Neither knew what was coming next, but both understood something had already changed forever. Winter came early that year. The city was cloaked in frost, and the Vaughn Global Tower glittered like a frozen monument against the gray sky. Amelia stood in her corner office, the same view she'd stared at 1,000 times before. Yet everything about it felt different now. The reflection staring back at her wasn't the cold, unreachable CEO she once was. Her eyes were softer, her hands steadier. On the desk sat a simple white envelope, her resignation letter. She'd made the decision quietly, after months of thought. The company was thriving again, not because of her ambition, but because of the heart she'd rediscovered. For the first time in years, she didn't want to lead from above. She wanted to live among the people she'd spent a lifetime trying to understand. The door creaked open. Elijah entered, wiping his hands on a towel, his uniform sleeves rolled up. "You wanted to see me, ma'am?" Amelia smiled faintly. "Yes." "Come in, Elijah. Sit down." He hesitated. "I'm not really the sitting in the CEO's office type." "Well," she said, pulling out a chair for him, "maybe it's time we change that." He chuckled and sat, though uneasily. "What's all this about?" She slid the envelope across the desk. "My resignation." His eyebrows shot up. "You're leaving?" She nodded. "At the end of the quarter, I've done what I came to do. It's time for someone else to take the reins." "Ma'am, forgive me, but why? You just saved this company. People love what you're doing now." She looked at him, her expression serene. "I used to think success was about winning, but now I know it's about finishing well. And I don't want to finish as a billionaire chained to numbers. I want to finish as a human being." Elijah was quiet for a moment. "You sure about this?" "I've never been surer," she said softly. "Besides, I already know who I want to run the new foundation we started." He tilted his head. "Who?" She smiled. "You." He blinked. "Me?" "Yes. The foundation project needs someone who understands what real wealth is. And that's not found in bank accounts. It's found in people." He shook his head, half laughing, half incredulous. "Miss Vaughn, I clean floors." She leaned forward. "You see people. You listen. You lead without needing to be seen doing it. That's leadership, Elijah." "The kind I can't teach." His throat tightened, and he looked down, humbled. "Ma'am, I don't have the education for that kind of job." She smiled warmly. "Neither did I when I started. You'll learn. You've already taught me more than any Harvard degree ever could." Elijah didn't speak for a long time. His hands trembled slightly as he looked at the offer letter she slid toward him. Crisp paper with his name written in gold ink. Finally, he whispered, "You really believe I can do this?" "With everything I have," she said. Tears welled in his eyes, but he blinked them away. "Then I won't let you down." "I know you won't." That evening, after Elijah left, Amelia walked through the quiet building one last time. She passed the cubicles, the labs, the hallways where people laughed now instead of whispering in fear. Every corner of the company carried a different kind of energy, not competition, but community. She realized then that Elijah hadn't just changed her, he'd changed the air itself. At the lobby, she paused and looked at the gleaming floor, spotless, like always. It wasn't marble she saw, but reflection of who she had been and who she had become. A few months later, the snow began to melt. The foundation project held its first official opening ceremony in the old Vaughn Global Atrium. Cameras flashed, journalists swarmed, and banners hung with the words, "Building people, not just profits." Elijah stood on stage in a new suit, nervous but dignified. His children were there in the crowd, pride shining in their faces. He scanned the room and found Amelia standing near the back, wearing a simple coat instead of a power suit, clapping quietly. Their eyes met, and he smiled, the kind of smile that said thank you without words. When it was his turn to speak, Elijah took a deep breath and stepped up to the podium. The room hushed. "Most of y'all don't know me," he began. "I used to mop these floors. Used to think that was all I'd ever do. But life's funny. It'll break you down just to show you what you're really made of. I learned that success ain't about standing taller than others. It's about reaching down and pulling someone else up." A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Amelia's eyes glistened as she watched. Elijah continued, his voice steady. "Miss Vaughn taught me that no matter how high you rise, you can't forget where the ground is. And I guess in a way, I reminded her where the sky starts." Soft laughter filled the room. He smiled gently. This foundation ain't just about money. It's about mercy, opportunity, dignity, things you can't buy but you can give, and we're going to give plenty. The audience erupted in applause. Cameras clicked. Amelia felt something deep in her chest, not pride exactly, but peace. For once, she wasn't the story. She was part of something bigger. After the event, she walked up to Elijah as the crowd thinned. "You were incredible," she said. He laughed. "You think so?" "I was shaking the whole time. Nobody could tell." He studied her quietly for a moment. "You sure you're okay with walking away from all this?" She looked around, the smiling faces, the life buzzing through the room. "I'm not walking away," she said softly. "I'm walking toward something new." He nodded, understanding. "What are you going to do now?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe travel. Maybe teach. Maybe just breathe for a while." "Well," he said, smiling, "whatever you do, don't stop shining light where it's dark. You got a gift for that." She smiled back. "Funny, I was going to say the same to you weeks past. The foundation thrived. Small business grants were approved, families lifted out of poverty, and hundreds of lives quietly changed." Elijah proved to be a natural leader, steady, wise, and humble. He didn't talk about profit margins, he talked about people, and everyone listened. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, he'd find Amelia waiting outside after an event, both of them sitting on the building steps, watching the city lights dance. They'd talk for hours about life, about faith, about how strange it was that a janitor and a billionaire could become equals. One night, as they sat side by side, Amelia said softly, "You ever think about that first night we met?" He chuckled. "You mean when you asked me for financial advice as a joke?" She smiled sheepishly. "Yeah, I was arrogant." "You were curious," he corrected. "Big difference." "Still," she said, "I thought I had everything figured out." "And you did," he said. "You just hadn't figured out yourself yet." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the city glow. "Thank you, Elijah." For seeing the person behind the armor, he smiled. "Thank you for proving that armor can come off." They sat in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't need filling, where words have already done their job. Above them, the stars peeked through the clouds. For the first time in her life, Amelia felt truly rich, not because of her success, but because of connection. Because she'd learned that power doesn't come from control, but from compassion. When she finally stood to leave, she turned to Elijah. "You know," she said, "I think you were meant to change this place." He grinned. "Maybe. But I think we were meant to change each other." And as she walked away into the cool night, Amelia knew he was right, because sometimes the greatest teachers come from the humblest places. And sometimes the richest lessons are born from the poorest beginnings. The billionaire who once mocked a janitor had learned to listen. The janitor who once mopped marble floors had learned to lead. And together, they had discovered the one truth that bound every human being, that dignity, when shared, multiplies. The city lights shimmered across the glass tower, reflecting not wealth, but something purer, the glow of two souls who had found redemption not in fortune, but in faith, forgiveness, and the courage to see each other as equals. And in that reflection, the story of Amelia Vaughn and Elijah Carter would live forever, a reminder that wisdom can wear any uniform, and that sometimes the brightest light begins with a mop and a heart full of grace.